Welcome to our final Community Advisory Group meeting of the year, not the final. We still have another whole year ahead of us and lots more opportunities. The CAG process will live on. But tonight we do have a great program lined up for you. Again, my name's Daniel Isofano with MIG. We are here to facilitate and support the CAG meeting process. Molly is also here with MIG to provide any staff assistance along the way, along with Ross and other members of the LBNL staff team. So we'd like to begin, as we always do, with a round of self-introductions with members of the Community Advisory Group. I will pass the microphone around, starting with Polly.
Hi, I'm Polly Armstrong. I'm the CEO of the Berkeley Chamber of Commerce.
I'm Rich Sextro. I'm a Berkeley resident and I'm a retiree from Lawrence Berkeley Lab.
I'm Carol Cheverling. I represent the Strawberry Creek Watershed Coalition.
I'm Ann Wagley and I'm a Berkeley community member.
Phil Price. I work at the lab and until recently was on the board of the Golden Gate Audubon Society. I've been termed off, but I still kind of represent their interests.
I'm Chris Adams. I'm a Berkeley community member.
Paul Lick, director of the UC Botanical Garden.
Good evening. I'm Alex Luce. I'm a UC Berkeley PhD candidate and also conduct my research up at Berkeley Lab.
Dean Metzger, representing the neighborhoods in Berkeley.
Jim Hines, assistant to the city manager. I'm representing the city manager.
Elizabeth Stage, director of the Lawrence Hall Science.
I'm Doug Lockhart. I'll be speaking about capital projects here in just a moment. And I'm Sam Chapman. I'm manager of state and community relations for the laboratory. And for those of you who have been coming to these meetings for a while, in particular CAG members, I am going to be joining the ranks of Rich Sextro and becoming an ex-lab retired employee soon. I'll be around for a couple of months, but this is likely to be my last active CAG meeting. Armando Viramontes, who most of you know, who is in the back of the room there, will be stepping in and taking over all of the CAG activities. So you'll be seeing Armando rather than me at this table in the future. So I was here for the launch of the CAG in 2010, and it's been about 5 years, and it's been wonderful to be a part of this process and follow its evolution. And I look forward to following it in the future, but as I say, I'll be in the status of Rich in the future. So thank you all for your participation over the years, and thank you all for everything you've done to make this process work better. It's been a pleasure really getting to know all of you and working with all of you. And thank you, Daniel.
Right. Well, we'll keep you here at the table, no doubt. Glenn, did you want to introduce?
Yeah, Glenn Kubiak, Chief Operating Officer. Sorry for being late. What's with the parking tonight?
We're good. So we're going to get right into our first brief update from Doug Lockhart. Doug is a manager of facilities at the lab, and he will talk about what's going on with the design and construction projects, as we normally do to keep you up to date. And then I'll say a lot more about the rest of the program this evening and the various speakers that we have lined up. Doug?
So as you can recall, we've completed a couple of projects. The Flex Lab has completed and GPL project has completed. So those are on our discussion tonight. But we still have 4 projects in construction. You heard about our CERC facility before. The CRT facility, the big computational facility. And we're just about to begin Old Town demolition. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have a proposed project called IGB. So I intend to keep my remarks very brief tonight because we want to leave as much time as possible for the full program. The Solar Energy Research Center, you've seen this building. We're finishing up construction now. We're in punch list. They're doing finishes, things like that, and getting ready to prepare the building for occupancy. We have a program that's in lease facilities, is waiting for the completion of the facility. We intend to move them into the facility and be fully operational by next June is our schedule for that. Please just shout out if you have any questions on these. Our CRT facility is well along in construction. You can see its facility here, the aerial, and we're well into construction. We have a full construction crew there now. We'll be occupying the facility and starting operations late spring next year, April, May. We'll start to move machines in, and following that, there'll be the scientists will be moving into the office space as well. So by the end of next calendar year, the facility should be fully operational and fully occupied by an office space, scientists and high-performance computing machines. Old Town demolition, we have bids in for the work, and we're ready to start that. We have a couple of approvals to go with the program that's funding the demolition. We expect to begin demolition about February of next year. That should get started. And our proposed integrative genomics building should go on the old Bevatron site. That is still pending authorization from Congress for the fiscal 15 budget. So that's the start of that is still in the congressional process.
What is the opportunity for CAG to weigh in on what's going to go on as far as the design is concerned and other kinds of things that's happening?
Good question. So did everybody hear the question? The question was, what are the opportunities for CAG to be involved in the finishes and so forth of the facility? So once the project is funded, there'll be a period of approximately a year when the building will be in design, and during that process, there will be opportunities for presentations to the CAG and to gain input and feedback from the CAG for the finishes of the project.
Okay. Go ahead.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So
that's it?
That concludes my remarks.
All right. Well, in that case, are there any other comments or questions here before we move on? Carol and then Phil.
I'm wondering if the north branch of Strawberry Creek, which was under the old Bevatron, is still pumping up water.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
There's been water coming up at that site ever since they took down the Bevatron. And I'm wondering if it's still coming up. And my next question is it ever tested and monitored? I think that in all these situations, I would like to know about the water quality monitoring, if there is any going on for these places on the campus.
Okay. Yep. So that would be identified in the environmental documents. Anything that the construction of that project would be analyzed as a result of the environmental process for the building.
Analyzed now or from before?
Well, it has to be analyzed relative to the development on the project, whether or not that would change. If it's an ongoing issue, that would be covered by our EH&S program, our ongoing program.
So, and Doug, we've had this ongoing theme of discussion with regard to all the projects at the lab, and Carol in particular has asked us to pay close attention to that. You're saying that as part of the environmental studies for this project that should be revealed or information should be brought forward on the hydrology affecting the site.
If the project affects the hydrology.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So hopefully we could. Yeah. You're saying. You're asking that it be also monitored on an ongoing basis through the planning and design and construction process. Okay. Okay, well, maybe we can make note of that and bring something more to the table on that. Glenn, comment?
Yeah, so as you know, Carol, there are a number of actively analyzed wells across the site. There are a few, I'm not sure of their precise location with respect to the proposed footprint of the integrative genomics building, but those would be happy to bring the results of the ongoing, this is part of the pump and treat that we've been doing for, Rich could say, probably a couple of decades, but we can bring that forward. As far as, no, the lab is doing the monitoring as part of it. Okay, all right, okay.
Let's see, Phil was next up.
This maybe is more of a question for Sam than for you. Sam will be delighted to when I stop asking these questions of him, at least. But the buildings that are, some of these buildings represent new employees at the lab. CRT, I think these are people currently in Oakland mostly, and genomics maybe also moving up from elsewhere?
From Walnut Creek.
From Walnut Creek, yeah. So one of the things in the lab's long-term development, LDR, long-term development plan, the required mitigations is to increase shuttle service to meet increased demand from increased population at the lab. That's actually been a required mitigation for quite a while, and yet shuttle service is this, at least to the main part of the campus, is the same frequency that it was before, except for the times of day when it's lower, less frequent than it was before. For a while, I don't know how many of these get forwarded to Sam, but I would take photos anytime I got on the shuttle and it was standing room only. I would take a photo with my camera and email that to to bus services and complain that the bus service is not adequate. And I got back an email saying it is adequate, because if you miss the bus because it's too full for people to get on, you can just take the next bus. And if that one's full, you can take the one after that. So there's the fact that they're not 100% occupancy, including standees, during all of rush hour indicates that bus service is adequate. I don't think that's true. I don't think the lab is meeting our required mitigation to, it's a traffic mitigation, to increase bus service to meet increased demand. It will definitely not be true when we have hundreds more employees coming up the hill. But the lab will still be able to say that, oh, the buses aren't all 100% full. I think we've reached a point where it's a deterrent. People don't like having to stand. They don't like having to wait another 10 minutes if they can't get on a bus. So we're never going to get to literally 100% capacity if that's what the lab is waiting for. I would like to hear an affirmative statement. At what point does, or how does the lab decide to increase bus service? When to increase bus service? And by the way, I know about overheads. I know about overhead rates. It kills me how much employee costs, including mine, are. But this is a required mitigation, and it's one that many of us lab employees use. So I don't know if there's a question for you, because it's not really construction related, but it's related to more people coming in when these buildings are done.
Okay, Glenn is going to take it.
The answer is yes. Thank you, Phil. Now, seriously, we understand. I mean, you do the math. It's 300 people in the IGB, all of whom are coming from off-site. And you just run the numbers, so we absolutely understand that we will have to increase the bus shuttle frequency. We may actually, and we're studying that, and that probably seems like a really weak response, but that's the honest truth. And we may actually reconfigure some of those routes, but obviously we have to do something when we're introducing that many more people, because the IGB integrative genomics building is not only creating additional demand, but is taking away some of the current parking spots. So we will be doing that.
Mm-hmm. And it will. When the buildings become occupied, or before, or after, or?
Well, probably. We won't be changing the bus shuttle frequency for this new cohort of people until shortly before the people get there. Whether as you say, and it is also true that the lab population overall has declined over the past couple of years. And, every time we study the frequency and the ridership, we're not seeking 100% all of the time. That said, we do have a railroad to run, and so if we need to expand because the ridership demands it, then we will do that in a measured way that's affordable. But to answer your basic question, yeah, we'll definitely be increasing the shuttle frequency and maybe also reconfiguring the routes as a result of moving this population.
And if I could too, I think, Phil, one of your parts of your question was, is there a trigger? What is the threshold or the criteria?
Well, it sounds like, if I'm understanding that correctly, when the first of these buildings opens, that
don't have
will...
a schedule yet for that.
The other thing
Sam?
is, I don't know if you were at the meetings, but John Elliott is leading a transportation planning process to plan for the buildings that are under construction and future growth at the lab. And he did make an initial presentation on that process to the CAG. And he said he would come back, he will come back to the CAG and report on how that process is going and the intent of that process is to minimize single occupancy vehicle trips and to maximize shuttles and other alternatives that keep cars from coming to the lab. So that process is underway, though. You might want to connect with him directly on that as well.
Yeah. In fact, we just met with John and Director Alvasatos today on just this topic, and we're chartered with a project to figure out all the numbers.
Yeah. Well, I think already the two themes, water, traffic, transit use, are key impact parameters for the community, and not surprisingly, the idea is to keep everyone apprised of the levels of impact and how we're monitoring and mitigating those impacts. So I think that fits in well with our whole purpose here as a CAG. Let's see, Rich.
Well, so let me ask a completely different question, but I guess I'm going to look at Glenn. Maybe he's the right guy to answer this. So the university just announced a new reconceptualization of the Richmond Bay facility, Richmond Bay campus, right? So what's the lab's involvement in that now at this point with that new reconceptualization, or at least the way they announced it?
Yeah, we're still working very actively with campus in the planning phases. So as we've talked about in this meeting a number of times and in public meetings at Richmond, the University of California, Berkeley is now in the lead for the strategy and the development. We see a number of opportunities, obviously not for near-term consolidation of biology, which we've also talked about here. I won't speak for the new Associate Laboratory Director, Ramesh Ramamurthy, who just came in, I think, but certainly there seem to be opportunities for applied technology, an area that you know much better than I do, at the Richmond Field Station, at Richmond Bay campus, but the specific elements of that strategy are not defined yet. So, but we are now and expect to remain an active participant in the planning and ultimate use of that site, but that the campus is very much in the lead for the development of that. Thanks for the question.
Okay, let's see, Chris.
Well, this is a follow-up to what Rick just asked about. I regret that I had so many emails from being out of town that I couldn't retrieve this one after having just scanned it, but Chancellor Dirks was quoted as saying something to the effect that because the lab will no longer be using the Richmond Field Station, we are going to have some kind of a global university. Those two words I think are accurate. And his implication was that the lab is not participating anymore because they don't have any funding. So I think that this is something that needs to be explained much more fully than what we've just heard.
Well, I think his statement indicated that the lab does not have current funding to build projects at that site, which is accurate, and the campus is in the lead, as Glenn just stated, and he has a vision for a new configuration out there, which is more of a global emphasis. So, but I'm not going to speak for him. The fact that we don't have funding today to build something out there doesn't mean that the lab won't have funding in the future, and still looks to that as a place for future expansion.
Okay.
Emily, do you want to add anything about that?
That's correct. I would just add that the name that has been that we're using to describe the vision for the campus is the Berkeley Global Campus. But the activities there will certainly involve the same kind of research that the lab and the campus have been talking about doing through the whole planning process. The lab doesn't have money to build a building there right now, but neither does the campus. So really what we're really trying to look, the bigger picture of the kinds of things we can do together, and with the interest in, the way in which research is being done globally and the way in which people are moving from university to private research to lab research. I mean, I think that affects everybody that's doing this kind of investigation in the future. So I think that's really more the idea of it, rather than that, the lab isn't involved in it anymore. It's really a question of involvement in the first initial building, which, to tell you the truth, no one knows who the first builder is going to be.
Right, that's helpful.
Just to be very clear, it's certainly true that we're a lot less involved than we were for the reasons that we've talked to folks about. And because we don't have near-term funding or have even identified an urgent near-term need, our involvement is a lot less than it was. And so that's really that's the current status. And as that status changes, as opportunities materialize, as the potential for funding materializes, we will do as we've done with this group in the past. We will bring that to you to discuss. But right now, I'm just telling you what the current status is.
Okay. Well, it sounds like the term global campus leaves a lot of possibilities to the imagination, so aptly named at this point. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to the main agenda item for this evening. And just in the way of a brief introduction, many of you stalwart CAG members will remember that probably about a year ago or so, we had a very extensive conversation about how the lab and all of the activities at the lab and the campus together combined to create a lot of energy, a lot of new ideas, a lot of technologies, and spin-off companies and organizations and whatnot. And the conversation moved to the idea of, well, how could we more actively or systematically take advantage of this brain power represented by the two entities. And also you recall that in the world generally, certainly across America, there's active conversation about this idea of innovation districts and planning and creating designs for innovative physical plans that also bring cohorts of people together to spur innovation. This is the talk all over the place where we work, different cities, different states, all across America. Here in Silicon Valley, we have the prime example of innovation district, namely Silicon Valley. The Stanford campus, Stanford Research Park, was a huge beacon for this sort of thinking, and that has spread all across the globe. And so we realized that there was a lot of interest in wanting to talk about that here, and so this program this evening was designed to respond to that initial conversation, which we had and seemed to be one worth pursuing in more depth and more detail. So consequently, we have brought together a whole group of presenters and panelists to engage with you to share their ideas about how innovation and technology can be harnessed here locally, how it could be used to spur the creative process, ultimately leading to new inventions, new companies, economic development for the city of Berkeley and for the region as a whole. So with that in mind, we are going to start things off with Suzanne Storer, who is serving on the outreach team for the lab's IPO office. I believe IPO stands for
Suzanne will be
Innovation and Partnerships Office.
Innovation and Partnerships Office. She's a registered professional engineer and has been involved for at least 20 or more years in describing technologies, helping individuals and organizations license those technologies in an effort to communicate science and other possibilities to a wide range of stakeholders. So Suzanne is going to give us an overview of her functions there in the Innovation and Partnerships Office, technology transfer, some of the current initiatives, and then we're going to move on to a series of quick presentations by the people you see on the agenda here, and I'll give a few brief words for each one as we get along in the presentation. So, Suzanne, take it away.
Thank you
Welcome
so
to the
much.
CAG. All right.
Thank you. And I'm great. It's great to have this opportunity. I first want to tell you that our Chief Technology Transfer Officer is Elsie Quate Randall. She would have been here giving this presentation. Is very sorry to miss it, but she's at a UC-wide intellectual property managers meeting. It's an annual meeting, so her role is critical in representing the lab there. So you have me instead. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about what the Innovation and Partnerships Office does, how we work with business, how that work ultimately benefits society, the community at large. You've heard many times, I'm sure, Berkeley Lab is the home of team science. The attitude that we have at the Innovation and Partnerships Office is that team goes beyond the researchers that are employed there. It includes university partners, nonprofits, as well as industry consortia that we work with, and established businesses and startups. And I'll talk about how we work with each of those groups as we go on. That kind of interaction, going beyond the scientists we have, has a lot of really positive outcomes. Of course, new scientific discovery. We have industry partners who come to us and seek out scientists with a specific expertise who can help them co-develop a technology, something that fits into their product line or fits into their future goals, and that leads to new discoveries. That then is an innovation for society as technologies are developed, commercialized, and then that reaches everyone with life-saving discoveries, energy efficiency, the list goes on. And with business developing more products, you have the economic impact, economic development for the community and for the nation. We could talk about the scientific discoveries of the lab for days. Literally, one measure of that are the R&D 100 awards. Those are given every year to the top 100 innovations as seen by R&D Magazine internationally. The lab has earned 73 of those. And many of those are co-developed with startups or industry partners. Over 40 startups have been developed based on Berkeley Lab technologies. And each year we do a measurement for DOE. It incorporates the software licenses, licensed technologies, startups, to get this number for last year. It was almost $38 million in value in goods and services that embody Berkeley Lab technologies. And of course, the benefits that you see from our technologies. Just in one area to illustrate, energy efficiency technologies developed at Berkeley Lab, everyone's very familiar with. There was a study some years ago by NAS showing that just the energy efficiency standards developed at the lab have saved about $48 billion in energy cost. And that study was some time ago, so that number has increased. Looking at one of our startups then from the business side of that, Aeroseal, licensed a few years ago, they announced in May 2014 that their duct sealing service, which saves energy from heating and cooling by sealing ductwork, that they had sealed over 100,000 homes and businesses' ductwork since their founding. They're now in almost 50 states with franchises, so there's a business opportunity, energy savings all together, and that's a great illustration of what these kinds of startups and partnerships can do. When a potential industry partner comes to the lab, they're met with a huge range of possibilities. We handle so many different types of science. We have so many user facilities. The question is, what's going to make the best match? I'll just talk really briefly about the user facilities that are available. About 10,000 scientists come to the national user facilities at Berkeley Lab each year. 2/3 of those are from university, about 1/3 from industry. Those facilities include the Advanced Light Source. I understand you toured that fairly recently. The tools there can be used for anything from battery material research, solar cell materials research, and even looking at proteins that lead to cures for disease. The Joint Genome Institute, technologies developed there can factor into environmental cleanup, biofuels development, and then, of course, the one-of-a-kind nanofabrication facilities at the Molecular Foundry can help a business looking to scale up from solar devices to electronics. And then the entire field of advanced computing, more and more businesses are looking at these models before they invest. They want to do some very complex modeling to see where their invention might take them. Energy Sciences Network, or ESNet, is one of the very fastest data processing networks. And then the National Energy Research Scientific Computing Center, NERSC, another very high-level computational facility that's available for industry users and nonprofits. I understand you had a complete presentation on Flex Lab. It's one of the unique capabilities we have. It's a really fascinating test bed for looking at a whole building energy efficiency solution. Users right now are PG&E, a nonprofit, as well as WebCore, a builder. So a good range there. The Advanced Biofuels Process Demonstration Unit, ABPDU, as we call it, that's companies that are developing biofuels can see how their particular approach scales up for alternative fuels. Another way industry works with us is to look at technologies that have already been developed by our scientists but are early stage, and they may choose to invest in them, to commercialize them. This is just a handful of our licensees. I'll point out Maxon, which licensed a low-emission burner technology, and that's now commercially available for manufacturing use. Nanosys is, down at the bottom here, is an energy-efficient electronic display, and it came out of the quantum dot technology. They're offering their QDEF display in some Kindle Fire models, as well as a new release of an Asus notebook computer. So these things started out as very early stage technologies. They're now being used. Industry consortia, two great examples. CalCharge, a newer group, is a combination of lab researchers with industry partners to accelerate battery technology, something we all know is important for transportation and energy saving in the future. Semitech is a similar consortium, much older, with the semiconductor industry, just a group of industry people coming together, Samsung, HP, and others saying we need to do research to stay ahead of the curve. An interesting thing about CalCharge, there are some big players on there, Duracell, VW, LG, as well as some small companies, smaller energy companies in Fremont and Hayward. So it's a great big business, small business research partnership. So again, there's a lot of possibilities. What does a partner do? How do they participate? What they do is they come to the Innovation and Partnerships Office. This office was renamed. You may have heard of our Technology Transfer and Intellectual Property Management Office, and that was the group where you might have heard announcements of how many patent applications were filed and how many research or inventions were disclosed by our researchers, and we still do that in our office. Just to give you, for last year, our researchers disclosed about 170 new inventions, and we filed patent applications on 173 of those, and about 115 patents were issued. So that's still happening. We're still making discoveries, filing patent applications. But when last summer, Elsie Quate-Randall, who I mentioned to you, joined us, she decided we needed to have more of an outward-facing view. We were doing licensing with business, but the group that was handling the user agreements for those user facilities was housed in a completely different group. So she brought us all together this fall, and we were renamed the Innovation and Partnerships Office. So literally an industry partner coming in can make one phone call, send one email, and then we can help direct them to the right partnership. And that's what we do. And that's Elsie, so you'll recognize her the next time she comes to a meeting. So to summarize what we do, we provide access to the user facilities and to the unique scientific expertise. We can assist in co-developing technology, licensing technologies to companies, and creating startups. A couple of really good success stories. Plant PV is not a startup that came out of Berkeley Lab Technology, but it's a group of people working on a solar solution who said they needed to get a sense to develop their business, how were things going to scale up? So they signed a user agreement with the Molecular Foundry. One of the factors at the Molecular Foundry is if you publish your findings, you can use the facility at no cost. And they did that. So I think this is fascinating. You can see there is, at the bottom right, their publication that they put out. So even though they had a business interest, they're sharing what they learned with the science community. So I think that really is a win for everyone. Another story, Verdia. They're looking at finding or creating chemicals from renewable feedstocks. So making the things you use in your everyday life, but getting the petroleum out of that supply chain. They signed up with the Joint Bioenergy Institute to do a collaborative research project. And they were, in that work, they were so able to accelerate and meet their milestones, they actually were acquired by another company for, I think, $62 million. So very successful. Just one of our licensees, as we're wrapping up an early stage technology that goes into lithium-ion batteries, making them safer, more reliable, has gone on now to CO, which has gotten a lot of venture backing, Khosla Ventures, one of them, to have transportation-type batteries. And to Celogen, and you'll see one of the founders, Nathan Hilson's on the panel later, he can tell you more, but they have a great model of offering their biotech research tool to for no cost to non-commercial institutions and partnering with industry as well. Very quickly, we have a website right there, ipo.lbl.gov, and a Twitter handle where we have a separate Twitter feed from lbl.gov. We focus on what our startups are doing, some of their achievements, as well as we promote some of these community-wide meetings for entrepreneurial-minded researchers, incubator space, accelerator groups, things like that. So that's mostly what we're promoting there. So again, here's that one-stop email, phone call for industry partners to reach us.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Suzanne. We'd like to go right on to the next brief presentation here with Ramesh, who is also a former LBNL employee in the past, went to Washington, worked with Stephen Chu at the Department of Energy and headed up the Sunshot Initiative there. He's worked at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and then more recently, Paul Alivisatos, our lab director, brought him back to head up a brand new directorate, which is called Energy Technology. So he's here to give you a briefing on how this encompasses environment, an energy and technology division, which is already operating up at the lab. And so Ramesh is going to take it away and give us another overview here. All right.
First, thank you very much for having us over. Oh, that's much better. I'm by nature very restless. I'm sugar low, so even more restless. So, but let me start with a murder scene. Okay, I started I was introduced. I did 2 years with Steve Chu, 2 of the best years of my life. So much so that my family was still in California. I have small kids who were like 10 or 11. So when I came back, I used to come back once every month. And once one of my twin daughters, she said, it seems like you like to hang out with your Sunshot friends a lot more than you like to hang out with us. Why don't you give us up for adoption? So, okay. So I went back to Steve and said, boss, I got to go back home. But it was a lot of fun. I'll tell you why it was fun. It's because Steve Chu was very unique, is a very unique individual. It was incredible amount of commitment to doing something useful for mankind. And this guy has a Nobel Prize, all the other stuff. But I don't think all of those things matter to him, but the commitment to do something about climate, about energy, and stuff like that. And so I ran something called the Sunshot Initiative. But the sobering part of that was the following. I started on the 2nd of January, 2011. On the 3rd of January, 3 companies, one of them was funded for 23 years with your money, taxpayer money, and 2 of them were about 10 years. They all came and said, hey, look, we are going to, one was going to China, the other one was going to Malaysia, the third one was going to Philippines. And I didn't have a feel for that because I'm a physicist. I do really basic science in my real research. But to all of us in my team, it was very clear that something really fantastic was happening. Bad fantastic was happening. We were losing intellectual property from this country, paid for by the taxpayer, paid for by all of us. But it was going primarily away from this country because we just did not figure out how to take knowledge and convert it into a value proposition for the taxpayer. And typically that happens by somebody creating something. One of them is manufacturing. And I believe we as a country have abdicated the responsibility for manufacturing across the country. And it's coming back again. So in 2011, we were yelling and screaming at anybody who would care to listen. And there were a few people. Steve was, of course, very good. The Economic Council, NEC, got into this business. A couple of really smart economists said, hey, we will help you. And so we started putting programs together which said, hey, look, let's start to reinvest in ourselves as a country. And there are so many examples that one can start to debate about that if you don't have a healthy manufacturing sector in your economy, you can be susceptible to a lot of fluctuations, susceptible to a lot of different things if you're purely a service-based or a finance-based economy. So that brings us to the discussion that we had about 20 minutes ago about manufacturing. Yes, indeed, I would love to set up a manufacturing demo facility at the Richmond Field Station. Pending, of course, what my boss is, and Paul is, of course, very supportive, and we need to go chat with our campus colleagues. But I think there's a lot to be won for the entire community, not just for Berkeley, but for the Bay Area and for the country. And so manufacturing is a big push for the energy technology area. I'm sorry, I brought slides, but I was a little bit abstracted today, so I thought I would just chat about it. So Paul and Horst and the leadership team created this energy technologies area. We are focused on a few things. We want to create energy, and for us it primarily means solar. And since I did the solar program, I have a little bit of knowledge into what goes into it. So we are actively creating this program where we will be able to look at the next generation of solar panels. For example, how do you make a solar panel that behaves like your TV? So if you dial back to 50, 60 years ago, they used to have a permit for a TV because TVs were kind of a unique curiosity, so they charged money for it. As a matter of fact, when I came from India, the first TVs that I watched was not our TV. It was our neighbor's TV that we watched through their kitchen. but the deal was that you had to buy a permit, like 100 rupees or something like that, to have a TV. Then they figured out that it's not worth it. You just charge advertising fees, so TVs don't have permitting anymore. And so we want to make solar panels that are as easy to use. I kind of jokingly told my team at Sunshot that we should have inflatable solar panels. You know, that you puff it up, put it up on your rooftop, and you take it off when you don't want to. But the point is user-friendly, very simple to use, not much of permitting fees, nothing like that. So that's a big focus for us. Historically, the energy technologies program at Berkeley, LBL, is very strong in energy storage. And you heard from my colleague about CalCharge. That's a partnership. It's a consortium across the Bay Area to help push manufacturing deployment of battery technologies. And so that will go faster now within this new energy technologies area. And historically, we've been very good, and we will continue to be good in the area of energy analysis. We have some of the biggest policy people in the country, in the world, in the area of energy, efficient use of energy. Art Rosenfeld, of course, was the founding father of this division, and so a lot of the ethos of this division comes from Art. And then the fourth part of it is, of course, efficiency. How do you use energy very efficiently? Whether it's in buildings, which is a big focus for us, and you heard about the Flex Lab. Think of the Flex Lab as a macro scale research location. I do nano. Paul does a lot of nano stuff, itty bitty things. But the Flex Lab is the other end of the spectrum, where the entire building is the research. So you can go and swap out windows, swap out doors, change everything, and measure. And ask the question, how does it use energy? How well does it use energy? So we are, as we speak, we're putting solar panels on top of this building with batteries in the building, so that at some point we can say, what happens if I turn the switch off and go off the grid? If you go to my native village, that is reality. The only grid is a lamp that you use with kerosene or something like that. If you go to sub-Saharan Africa, that's reality. If you go to many parts of this country, that may be reality, where you don't have a very robust grid. So we are envisioning the next revolution in energy. Like the cellular telephony, I worked for 6 years in Bell, which is the telephone business. And as you know, we had cellular telephony in this country. It was all discovered in this country. But we never deployed it in this country for a long time, mainly because for 20, 30 years, we had copper and fiber optics, $300 billion worth of investment. So the telephone companies never invested into putting in cellular telephony. Instead, it went to Asia. My mom had a cell phone in India before I had one here. So technology took a big left turn at Albuquerque and then came back to us because of deployment. That's going to happen in energy as well. 50 years from now, energy is going to be disseminated in a totally different way. Not the way that Edison wrote up, but with this huge amount of transmission. It's going to happen in a totally different way. What LBL is doing is to discover those new ways of disseminating energy like you can do. So those are our 4 areas. Clearly, being part of the community is a very, very important part for us. Let's not make no mistakes about it. We want to be good citizens of the community. And the community is not just Berkeley, not just San Francisco Bay Area. It's the entire US of A. We want to be a national lab for the nation. And we are. You look at the number of Nobel Prizes that we have, the discoveries that were talked about. And the energy technologies area, it has the same ethos that's built into it. So I'll take questions if you have any.
Okay, Ramesh, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. And we'll move right to the next presenter, Elan Gur, who's the founding director of Cyclotron Road. And that is maybe not unlike Sand Hill Road, the famous one down in Silicon Valley, which is the source bed for maybe over 20 research and development projects. And Elan has been involved with the DOE's Transfer Technology to Market program. He's very much involved in this technology transfer concept and really trying to promote Cyclotron Road as a way of taking these energy innovations and new technologies to manufacturing and larger scale. So take it away, Elan.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me here. I guess before I get started, I'll say 2 things. One is after the conversation about traffic, I'm not sure if Cyclotron Road, as the name for our initiative, was the best. And secondly, this is the second meeting in a week where I've been in a room with Ramesh, and rather than like me needing a crutch with slides, he sort of wowed the room with his storytelling. So hopefully you'll excuse me because I have a few slides here. I think this will fit in very well with what Ramesh just told you about the exciting new energy technologies area at the lab. This is sort of one of the lovely views of our bay from LBL. If you appreciate the bay, I think we all appreciate the bay and our home. One of the things that comes to mind when I look at these views now is actually some arithmetic. There's a lot of math and science that goes up on the lab. We won't do much here, but it's worth framing for the audience here. This small box represents 30 gigatons. It's just a square, but just in terms of scale, I want to give you a sense. 30 gigatons is the amount of carbon emissions that we globally release every year. That stuff stays in the atmosphere for we meaning the world globally, yeah. So 30 gigatons a year, and it builds every year. Basically, the international community, not just scientists, but politicians as well, have decided that there is a threshold, which is pretty important to keep in mind. Roughly a 2-degree rise in temperature, we think is a regime where we really start transforming the global ecosystem in terms of sea level rise, in terms of weather patterns, far worse than what we've seen. And some folks might think of this as a point of no return. I'm an optimist. I think this is just an important threshold that we should keep in mind. That threshold comes at around 500 gigatons of cumulative emissions.
And that's 2C, not 2F.
That's 2 degrees Celsius, correct? Yeah. And so if you just do 30 gigatons per year, and you think how many years will it take to accumulate 300 gigatons, it suffices to say I have a 22-month-old son. When he's my age, in the business as usual scenario, we will have hit this threshold unless something dramatic happens. And that to me, and we talked about Steve Chu here, Steve Chu used to speak about climate change at Berkeley, and I used to hear him speak, and this message was pretty well known and I think understood, and I just remember thinking, wow, this is scary. Right? And at the time, the question, what are the implications of 500 gigatons were less well known than they are now. I think now the international community really thinks it's scary with a lot more data behind that. Before it was just, well, we don't know what'll happen, it's a risk. I spent a few years also in DC and thinking beyond just technology and science, I realized that this isn't the scariest part of the story. The scariest part of the story is if our threshold where we want to stop is 500 gigatons cumulative emissions, it turns out if we add up all of the carbon that's contained in proven reserves of fossil fuels in the oil and gas, other fossil fuel companies around the world, meaning we know we have it, their stock prices, et cetera, assume that they will sell it. That number is about 3,000 gigatons. Okay, so that's what the world is planning to sell, to consume, to burn, and to release in the future. And so that's roughly $30 trillion. It was when I made this slide. Prices have fallen, right? But roughly $30 trillion worth of carbon. And so the question then becomes, well, if all we want to use is 500, if all we can use is 500, what the heck's going to happen to the rest? And I think one of the things that's been clear to me is a lot of the question of how do you stop the world from consuming these fuels, from emitting CO2, a lot of that's going to have to do with society. It's going to have to do with policy, et cetera. But the question becomes, even if society stands up and says, well, we've got to keep to this threshold, there needs to be an alternative. There needs to be an alternative way to use energy. And it's unclear, as Ramesh said, whether that's solar cells working like your TVs or blowing them up like balloons or any number of other things. And so in thinking about the role, I think, of scientists who care about this issue, for me, it's about creating those alternative options. And we live here in the Bay Area, which I always thought, having done my PhD here, that if those ideas were ever going to come out of anywhere, it was going to be this ecosystem, right? The heart of innovation, Silicon Valley. And when I left school, I basically thought, well, there's only one way to change the world in this area. It's develop a technology and go start a company and change the world, as we've seen so many companies here in Silicon Valley do. I had two experiences of starting venture capital-backed companies, one technology out of the lab. It was one of the logos you saw. And then I had a chance to spend a few years with the Department of Energy funding innovation across the entire US ecosystem. And over the past 10 years, the venture capital community was very, very excited about this opportunity around transforming the global energy landscape, right? To the extent that this is a $30 trillion problem, this is also a $30 trillion opportunity, okay? And so you can imagine investors opening up their wallets. What we learned over the last 10 years or so, though, is that the Silicon Valley innovation model and the venture capital innovation model, which works so well for developing social media apps or iPhone games, has actually struggles a little bit when it comes to developing these types of technologies. So this is a plot of actually venture capital dollars here in the US since 2010. And I'll point your attention to the dark orange line, which is for early stage, for the transformative new ideas. And basically it's fallen off. It's fallen off almost completely. There's your question.
Clean tech or all investment?
No, this is clean energy technologies.
Okay, thank you.
And basically the reason it's fallen off is because developing an app is different than developing a solar cell technology or an engine, right? You need much more expensive tools and facilities. You need a much broader array of expertise, real scientific expertise, as opposed to coding. There's more risk. It takes more capital. It takes longer periods of time, et cetera. And so the venture capital, the private investment community has basically decided, well, for these really new transformative things, it's not clear we can make money doing this. That's probably a good thing because we weren't as effective as we would have liked to be with that mode. But it also poses an opportunity, right? One of the things that we've seen in the last couple of years is across the country and really the world, the types of innovators who were going out and starting companies in this space have basically said, well, wait a second, it's not clear I'm going to start the next Google in the energy space. What should I do? Where do I go? How do I go make an impact in these hard energy technologies? And so this being Berkeley, and this being a place that has a national lab with a mission to try and solve these problems, and the capabilities and the tools and the resources and the expertise that could be leveraged for this problem, we're going to try something different. Okay, and the different sort of experiment that we're trying is this program that we're calling Cyclotron Road. And essentially, it's fairly straightforward. The idea is we have an opportunity right now to take the best and the brightest energy technology innovators from across the country and world who have gotten beat up trying to go down the sort of venture capital path that works so well for social media, et cetera. And we can try and create a home for them where they can be successful at developing those technologies and those solutions. And so the idea is to create a program that attracts those top innovators, the best and the brightest, and brings them here to Berkeley, provides them with project funding, not from private sector investors who are looking for a quick return, but from real strategic investors, whether it's government or corporations that are looking at a much longer term view of this problem and this opportunity. Keep that culture and urgency like a startup that is so successful at making Silicon Valley work. And then provide additionally mentorship, a network to think beyond just the conventional business models of Silicon Valley to a broader set of models which work for the industrial technology space. And then finally, you can't just open up a garage, in Soma or on University Ave and say, okay, innovators, come in here and innovate, right? Again, you need the tools, you need the expertise. And so ultimately, embed this whole sort of proto-incubator within the context of the National Lab. We sort of had this idea and we said, well, let's try it. And the leadership of the lab was very supportive of doing that. And so we put up a website and we said, well, we'd like to attract some of the best and brightest innovators to come to the lab and participate in a program like this. We did an announcement at the end of July and we said, we're just looking for five innovators and projects. And by the way, we only want the folks who are most passionate about doing this with their lives. They're really willing to uproot their lives and come here and do this. Within 3 weeks of this website going live, we had about 15,000 views from across the country and beyond. We had over 100 people within 3 weeks saying they were going to apply to this program. And ultimately, we narrowed that down to 10 finalists that came in to the lab. We were looking for 5. We actually found 6 phenomenal projects that we said, well, here's an opportunity to take someone and empower them and support them to change the world, and we can do it here. And so we've just selected 6 projects to be part of this pilot. I'll just give you one example. All the projects are really compelling and inspiring. two researchers, just one leaving her PhD, another leaving her postdoc, actually from Stanford, have been developing a technology which can be used to convert carbon dioxide electrochemically directly into chemicals and fuels. And if you think of the fuels piece of that, you say, well, you could take renewable electricity, you could take carbon dioxide that's being emitted, instead of emitting it, you can turn it into fuels. And then if those fuels do get burned in transportation, they create carbon dioxide, which you can then turn back into fuels. And now we've closed the cycle, right? So that's the type of idea of the types of technologies. Another technology is actually around converting wave power into electricity and providing erosion protection as another service, which I know sort of is close to home for folks in the community. I'll just stop by saying, I think there is a real opportunity, and I think this is what I would like to engage the broader community in thinking about, is as we've gone through this process, we've validated, we've been hearing over and over again, you know what, you're right, I'm not doing an app, I'm not doing conventional technologies that seem to work so well in other places. I do need a different type of program, a different type of support. And so we've been thinking about the fact that to the extent that that's sort of Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley is sort of a hub for web technologies and information technologies, and with UCSF and QB3 and a number of other programs, San Francisco has become a bit of a biotechnology hub. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to define something, a unique character, and say, for industrial technologies, for things that are harder, for things that really can transform our physical world for the better, we can create an environment and a home to do that sort of work. And I think that matches sort of the character of Berkeley and the East Bay quite well. And so I'd invite folks here. We've gotten quite a bit of support both from the Department of Energy and the private sector in terms of saying, well, you're doing this pilot, how do we expand this to a bigger private-public partnership? And my view is the partnership is not just between the lab and these amazing innovators that come in and the government, but it also has to be with the community, with the businesses, the industry, and the community around economic development, around the impacts of these sorts of projects. And so welcome your input there. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Sounded like you.
We're going to keep moving with our final brief presentation before our panel discussion, and we'll move on to Mike Cohen, who is the Director for Innovation, Ecosystem Development at the UC Berkeley Office of Technology Licensing. And so he collaborates with UC Berkeley researchers, faculty members, various established companies, entrepreneurs, investors, and those that are involved in patenting intellectual property and so on, in order to help get commercial projects moving. And he has an interesting background and career. Most recently, he's also been instrumental in creating the Berkeley Skydeck Incubator, which is in downtown Berkeley. Some of you may have heard about it. And he also narrowly lost a race for Berkeley City Council as well. So anyhow, he has quite a varied experience to build upon. So Mike, why don't you move into your presentation?
Thank you. I was invited to speak about how technologies get commercialized, both at the lab and the campus, and how you can do that locally. And so I've split the discussion into two parts. I'll spend just maybe 5 minutes on how innovations get commercialized, and I'll talk about how it occurs locally, and I'll save the case study for Q&A or for another time. So about 5 years ago, I did a bunch of research on over 50 innovations at the lab and the campus, and tried to just case model how they went from the lab to the market. And that research revealed that there are 4 common patterns. And so we created a model for those patterns and then used that model to try to figure out strategies to maximize the commercialization effort and the localization of that effort. And so this is the framework, the model. I call it the 4 M's because the 4 pathways are milked, morphed, mined, and marketed. And let me give you an example of each one and then talk about how they can be localized. One pathway is called the morphed pathway of commercialization, and that occurs when members of a research team just organically start to move from their applied research to a prototype to a beta product before you know they've spun out a company and they're off commercializing it. And this often occurs with technology that doesn't require a lot of capital to commercialize, like software, internet stuff, things that Elon was describing in the apps and things like that. And one example of that is, let's take Cali Solar. The researchers that had a joint appointment between the campus and the lab were figuring out how to use dirty silicon to create cheaper silicon cells, silicon wafers for solar panels. And so that professor and his team spun out of the research and they set up a company in Sunnyvale and worked to commercialize that technology. The mined pathway of commercialization occurs when entrepreneurs, they periodically scour the campus and the lab for innovations, and when they find something that interests them, they form a team, they write a business plan, and they spin it out. The largest pool of people that do this are actually MBA students at the campus, and so it's great to have an MBA program co-located with an engineering program in the National Lab. And this is actually one of the fastest growing pathways at the campus in the lab. And here's some examples. Let's pick a Duratech. About 5 years ago, some MBA students came to me and said, Mike, we're looking for some green technology to use in a business plan competition. So I introduced them to researchers that were doing smart lighting. And so together, the researchers and the MBA students created a business plan. They won a business plan competition. They started out in the university's incubator on Bancroft Avenue at the time. They got some funding. They moved to San Francisco, and then they were purchased recently. So that was a relatively nice success story. The milk pathway of commercialization occurs more and more because as the state funding goes down, the university and the lab are looking more and more for corporate funding. And when these corporations collaborate on research, sometimes when innovations occur, they'll just take that innovation in-house into their own R&D departments, and then they'll commercialize it that way. And many examples of that from the campus and the lab. One is this company called Nuprene. This company funded research to make fuels from algae. And they made some discoveries of making this kind of fuel called isoprenes. So they took the technology in-house. They created this company called Nuprene, and now that company is it's an international company. They have a lot of work going on in South America and Asia. And then finally, the marketed pathway for commercialization. That occurs because the fact of the matter is, at the campus and the lab, most of the innovations that are developed aren't ready for the market. Either the technology is not proven or the markets are too nascent. And so what we'll do at the lab and the campus is we'll often patent those technologies, and then we'll periodically market them to investors, to entrepreneurs, to small and large companies. And when the timing is right, a lot of those technologies can become commercialized. And one example of that is, let's take luminous devices. On the campus, about 7 years ago, they figured out a way to make low-cost LED lighting. It's called laser lift-off technology. And at the time, the LED market wasn't well developed. But we still patented that technology. And then eventually, this company that was a spin-off of MIT in Massachusetts discovered the technology. We licensed it to them, and now that company is probably providing one of the top 5 revenue generators for licensing revenue to the university. There's one other aspect of these that we discovered when I did this research is that there's 2 kinds of startups from the lab and the campus. There is the traditional spin-out, which is often spun out by students, grad students, and they take advantage of all of our resources. They do business plan competitions and use our mentor networks and and that's how they get going. But then there's the blast out. And these often occur because they're associated with star faculty. And when they're ready to go, they get their big-time funding, they get their big-time space, they get their management teams, and they don't need any business plan competition or any incubator. And so there's some examples here. This is about 10% of the spin-offs from startups from the campus, but it represents about 80% of the successful companies. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of the startups aren't successful. But what we've come to learn is that it's a great experiential learning opportunity for the students, and that's why it's so highly valued. So there you have it. Those are just, it's a very short summary of the 4 primary pathways for technology to get commercialized at the campus and the lab. Let me talk about the other side, the innovation ecosystem. So first, a definition. This is a cluster of R&D-oriented entities that can include large corporations, mid-size corporations, people like tech veterans at large companies, early-stage investors, serial entrepreneurs, as well as the value chain associated with these kind of activities, which could include lawyers, accountants, marketing people, and so forth. And one way to look at it is as a continuum here. So if you consider the campus and the lab here in Berkeley, there's this hyper-local innovation ecosystem which is based on access from the campus and lab that can be either by foot or by biking or shuttles and things like that. Then there's more of a local area which may be more accessible by car. It could be places in West Berkeley and Emeryville and Richmond. And then there's the metro area, which could include parts of the East Bay down south and across the bay to San Francisco and the peninsula and the regional and so forth. And so now we can just drop that framework into this model for the ecosystem and just generalize about to what extent each one of these pathways is conducive to local commercialization. And so, for example, the milk pathway, that's the one with the corporate R&D. Well, it's very dependent on where the corporate R&D is located. So if it's in Palo Alto or if it's in Singapore or whatever, that's often where those innovations go, and that's where they get commercialized. The morphed pathway happens to be a highly localized opportunity because all the team is already here. They're kind of spinning out of the campus or lab, and it's kind of ours to squander if we don't have the right environment for them to start up and grow here. Likewise, the mind pathway also is very conducive to localization. Again, the team is here, the technology is here, the people with the know-how are here. And so if we don't have the right environment, we can squander that opportunity as well. And then finally, the marketed pathway, that's kind of more random because, again, that occurs years after the innovation is developed, and it can depend on where the licensee is, whether it was, for example, that example I gave you in Massachusetts or local. So every innovation ecosystem that I've studied now, several universities across the country internationally, has its own dynamics. And our dynamic is that we are in this Bay Area cluster, and we have low barriers to exit the Berkeley and the East Bay. It's very easy for a startup or any kind of innovation to commercialize a team to leave Berkeley and the vicinity and go to the South Bay or San Francisco. In contrast, if you're spinning out of the University of Texas in Austin or the University of Washington in Seattle, it's harder for you to come to Silicon Valley. So we have this low barrier to exit, and so we've started to think about, well, how can we localize some of this innovation so we can take advantage of the economic development opportunities? And in 2007, 2008, one of the first things that we did with the chancellor of the campus and the director of the lab and several mayors is to create this thing called the East Bay Green Corridor. And I was on the steering team for that, and we tried to get that to start to localize some of the technology, especially the green technology in the East Bay. And then a few years later, the city of Berkeley government and some of the local businesses and the Chamber of Commerce and university, we created this thing called the Berkeley Startup Cluster, which again was an attempt to try to localize some of that, the innovation drain that was occurring on the campus, this notion of, it's like brain drain. When you lose these people, you lose all kinds of economic opportunity. Likewise, with innovation drain, you lose so much opportunity for the local economy in the cities. And so with the Berkeley Startup Cluster, we then created a set of incubators and accelerators like the Skydeck, the Foundry at Citrus, the QB3 Space Innovation Center in West Berkeley. And that's where we are now. developing this opportunity here. And I think I'm kind of out of time here, so I'll leave you with that, and then we can go to the panel and take questions from there.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mike. And as we do bring up the chairs and get ready for our panel, I wanted to see if CAG members had any comments, questions on the 4 presentations here so far. Any thoughts you have? And some of the themes for the panel here coming up are, what can we do to accelerate the connection between the lab and university research and the surrounding communities? What can we do in the city of Berkeley to foster the kind of innovation that is being developed right here in our midst? So, Paul and Jim, we'll pass the mic to you.
I don't know if Susan's still here. At the okay. At the beginning, you said something like, these outside entities, companies come to the lab, and you try to match them up with the right partner, which implies to me that they're just window shopping. Don't they come to the lab with an idea of what they want to do? Which way does it work?
So that's a very good question. These partners, do they come here and tell us exactly what they want? It is common for, especially the private business, to keep somewhat close to the vest what their ultimate goal is. They will come and meet with us and talk about specific qualities and technologies. They look at what we've developed, and that's on our website. We put up non-confidential descriptions of technologies, so they'll go through those either on their own or with some of our licensing associates to see if they know what they're looking for. They don't always tell us exactly what they're looking for, but that's part of where partnering with them is a real benefit. So we get them to work with us more, and then we can say, okay, we don't have anything in this catalog, but we have this researcher. Sounds like that's more where you want to do, and then we can look at more of a collaborative research or co-developing. So I think that's I know everyone I work with wishes they would come in and say they want exactly these parameters. That's often not the case, but I think that's where partnering and just being really open to work with them benefits.
Yeah, just getting this information out is a good first step. Obviously, there's a lot to learn here. Jim and Polly were next.
I have a question for Michael Cohen, which is, where's he? You mentioned the low barriers in the city of Berkeley, and I was wondering if you could say something more about that and what it would take to maybe not have such low barriers.
Well, it all comes all down to competitive strategy. How can we make our ecosystem, our cluster, better than the alternatives in San Francisco and the South Bay? And that's some pretty tough competition. So we actually have a set of 10 best practices that we're pursuing. I could try to pull it up on the slide, but for example, one of the things we need to do is offer more office space that's conducive to growth opportunities for these companies. There's a dearth of Class A office space in downtown and West Berkeley, and that's one opportunity that we're missing. Likewise, if we don't get fiber-based high-speed internet in the downtown and West Berkeley in about 3 to 5 years, we won't be competitive with these other areas. So there's 10 ideas like that we could work on to capture these companies instead of, again, letting them get away from us. It's ours to blow.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, Polly?
So I'm a salesman, not a scientist. And I'm really excited to hear that you've identified what the lab space is as industrial tech, which strikes me as a title that was come up with by scientists, not by marketers. But having said that, it's great that you're looking for something to hang your hat on that is biotech for Mission Bay and Google Tech or whatever it is at Stanford. And I just wonder if you have a team or a group, or you've brought in some non-scientists to help come up. I think marketing in so many ways that we have an identity, and a catchier title, but marketing it, I just think is huge and is going to help create a nest for the kind of activities we want.
Okay, interesting.
Well, I'll make a comment.
Oh, okay. All right.
Did you come up with the words?
No. Well, so I am a scientist. I've also done some marketing. I will say I got very excited about, to your point about having a nice term for this, about the term hard tech. The idea being that this is based on hard science. Industrial markets are very hard to penetrate. Still a possibility. It turns out trademarked by a group that's doing something that's a little bit different and may have some confusion. But if folks have ideas, I agree. I think in catchy.
Have you played with the energy idea any? Because the others are so sort of general.
Yeah.
And if you've got biotech, why not an energy? We need Stephen Donaldson here. We have 10 ideas.
Okay, these are good thoughts. I'm sure the right players are in the room actually to carry these ideas forward. Rich?
So I'm interested in the question, and I guess this goes to Elon and Mike and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on your name from the lab, the tech transfer office. So the question that I have is what are the measures of success? Because ultimately, one of the ways to market these kinds of things is to have successes to point to, right? And so I kept hearing a couple of times people refer to companies being bought out by somebody else, and that was a success. I guess from where I sit as a scientist, that doesn't exactly make it in terms of success because we still, you still may not have the photovoltaic cell or whatever. The company got bought out, and so all the people involved in the startup, made a lot of money. But so I'm interested in whether you guys have thought about the question of measuring success. What are the metrics? I realize it's going to be different, but for each kind of situation. But
Maybe we can have a little conversation on this, and then we'll bring our panel up and keep it going. So, Suzanne, would you like to comment?
Well, from the IPO standpoint, you would be shocked to know the government loves to measure things. And it's very hard to measure our success stories. I think it's a lab-wide partnership. I think our public affairs group does a great job of talking about the success of some of the basic research when it gets published, when it's really exciting and new. What we're working to do a much better job in an IPO is publicizing the startup success stories. And that's happening, in our first step into social media with that Twitter feed. For instance, Alphabet Energy is a company that started up about 5 years ago. They released their first product about a month ago. So we put that on the feed, we put that on our website, and we're working more with public affairs to tell those stories more. So, and that is an energy saving, it's a thermoelectric device to convert exhaust heat into energy. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to get those stories, we're trying to not sort of leave things behind when they get licensed, but follow the story. It isn't always easy because the story can meander with a lot of the startups.
I think there's we agonized about this in Washington. If you believe the Berkeley ethos is measured in terms of Nobel Prize, which is a good success measure in the science arena. But there is another one which is jobs created, which all of this stuff that Elon was talking about, if you start manufacturing, you can measure it in the number of jobs, whether it is, a manufacturing job or a deployment job like installing solar or whatever it is. I think the lab has a big role. The university has a big role in enabling it. So your success metrics can be very different depending on the perspectives that you take.
Okay, Dean has a question. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's get our panel up here and get ready for that. Jennifer, Stephen, Nathan, Bill, will introduce you all here momentarily, but if you could all just go up here and find a seat. Ramesh also, please join us. Well, there was going to be, but that's okay. Just go anywhere you want. We'll just get them all up here. Yeah. Boy, girl is one way to do it. Okay, go ahead. I think we have enough places. So Dean had a question and comment, and I'll say a few brief things about the panelists, so we want to save time and maximize discussion.
Thank you.
I basically sit here and listen to all of this and agree with 99% of it. But I think there's a component missing that I think all of you need to take a step back. What is the community responsibility you have of developing these kinds of things in a community that has neighborhoods that wants to remain livable? We saw what happened when West Berkeley was going to be rezoned. We finally stood up and said, no, we don't want to do that because our neighborhoods are important to us. I just want all of you to understand that, while I personally support what I think you do, there are a lot of people in Berkeley whose neighborhoods will no longer be livable if you're not responsible for what you do in our neighborhoods. Please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good food for thought and discussion here as we think about this innovation district right here in our own community. What does that mean from a physical planning and design and development standpoint? Turns out that a lot of what we have already in West Berkeley matches the criteria, so that's the good news, and even in downtown, except we may be missing some key ingredients, as was pointed out by Mike Cohen earlier on. So let me just briefly touch on our panelists, some of the ones that haven't been introduced to you. First of all, Jennifer is right here in position number 1. Excellent. She's working with us as a Sustainable Business Coordinator for the City of Berkeley's Office of Economic Development. She was a big promoter of the Berkeley Startup Cluster, works with Polly Armstrong in that regard. We have Stephen Golden, also very much a entrepreneur, owner of Swerve, the Berkeley furniture design and manufacturing firm. So again, we do have active manufacturing right here in Berkeley, and so he's very interested in promoting Berkeley as a home for innovative small businesses, which I think ties in with some of the points Dean was raising. Nathan Hillison, also sitting next to Stephen, has been devoted to synthetic biology, works with J-Bay in Emeryville. Tesla Gen, I believe, is one of your main areas of attention right now, incorporated in 2011. And so he will speak about how J-Bay and LBNL may collaborate to create these new startups. Jill Fuss, also scientist at LBNL, involved in Cinder Bio, which she'll have to explain what that's all about and how that plays into all of these issues. And she is a graduate of the QB3 Startup in a Box and QB3/UC Hastings Startup Legal Garage. So we'll need her to define all of those different combinations for us. Jay James, right here, is also a Berkeley native, received a PhD from UC Berkeley, worked at the lab as well, and has located his business Pico, how do you pronounce that? Picayune, okay, Picayune, to West Berkeley. He's also on the Energy Commission for the city. And then finally, Steve Visco is right there, and he is representing Polyplus Battery Company, also located in Berkeley, founded in 1990, so it's been going, what, a good 20 plus years, it sounds like. And he can bring a longer term perspective, believing that Berkeley is a good place to live, work, grow a business. And then we still have Ilan and Ramesh here joining the panel, as you've heard from them already. So we'd like to get things going, and just picking up on some of the themes that were raised already in the discussion. We'll also have more time to pass the mic around here for the CAG members to participate in this. And, I think, like we say, what can we do as a lab and as a community to further promote innovation, startup, job creation, and some would say also inclusive design and development and economic development opportunities. So we're always looking to advance all boats, and that's an important element or theme in the city of Berkeley. But it's starting with jobs across the entire spectrum of jobs, which is why I think manufacturing is particularly interesting, because you can start to involve not just PhDs and postdocs, but people with all kinds of technical skills and creativity across the board. So we would love to hear some of your comments there about how can we work together as a campus, as a lab, as a community to get the quality environmentally and community sensitive development that is the hallmark of the city of Berkeley. Anybody is welcome to start things off. Would you like to go here?
Since I have the mic, I'll start.
Yes, please.
I'm Jennifer. I work in the Office of Economic Development, and it's timely because the day after tomorrow, we will have a mixer. We have a mixer every couple of months that celebrates the Berkeley-Emeryville Bioscience Cluster. So I see a couple of new faces that I haven't invited yet to those. And on Wednesday, there is presentations from Cal interns who have done work. They're interns from both a science and a business background who go and spend time in some of these startups and get the kind of real-life work experience that they need, and the companies get the kind of support that they need. And it's a wonderful knitting together both of the business, government, because our office is one of the key supporters of this, and academia, the sort of three pillars that make a vibrant local economy.
Okay, any other comments from other panel members, how we can spur this kind of job creation and economic innovation? Go ahead, Steve.
I have an idea. Let's give the cordless mic to the panel.
Sure.
You can have the corded
We
mic.
will do that, okay, no problem.
It is.
Except you got a long cord too, so all of them have long tails. Okay, go ahead.
So I'd make a couple of comments about particularly what some of us are doing in the clean tech arena, because if you look at the typical VC model where you have companies that jump out, they develop an app, they get flipped, there's a lot of money made, but that money actually goes to a pretty small number of people. Manufacturing, the kind of things that we're doing in clean tech is quite different. I mean, this is going to have a big effect on the middle class. We're talking about creating enduring industries, not things that are going to come and go very quickly. So it's the time scale is very different, but the benefits, I think, are also very different. So Polyplus has been around for a while. We've been around since 1990. And even my own personal experience at the companies that we brought in the early days, a number of actually first-generation immigrant families from the Bay Area that came into our company with, in some cases, not even a high school education, who got exposed to technology, got trained as technicians. They then see the value of the education they got in our company, have gone on to encourage their kids to go on. We've got now second-generation kids going to college, and a lot of that happened because of the exposure to a tech environment. They see all the upside there. Mm-hmm. So I think for the community as a whole, this is a very positive thing. I don't see the downside. I think it's mostly upside.
So, Steve, what do you think is a compelling reason to locate a business in Berkeley? Why did you locate here?
Berkeley obviously brings it with it a lot of cachet. I mean, Berkeley is known, throughout the world as a center for innovation, as Ramesh said. I mean, there's a number of Nobel Prizes have been awarded at the university. So that with that comes a certain amount of credibility, but there's also there's a wealth of access here, not just to the lab, but there are a lot of machine shops and a lot of tech shops that have themselves been spun out of the lab, or associated with a variety of companies that have started. And the whole West Berkeley scene has gotten better and better and better. I mean, over the years, when we started Polyplus, the neighborhood we were in was a little bit iffy. I mean, going back and forth at night was a little, sometimes tricky.
Where are you located now?
We're now at the corner of 6th and Dwight. But we were actually closer. We were, I think, 5th and Bancroft originally. But you can see a lot of change, and I think it's a positive change. But I can tell you that at one point we did look at moving even to Emeryville because we were looking for a bigger spot. And I had all sorts of protests from my employees that, no, they want to stay in Berkeley. They love being able to walk to Berkeley Bowl. There are a lot of benefits.
Okay. Ilan is wanting to jump in on this question of why Berkeley and what is really attractive about this Berkeley environment as a place to do business and innovation.
Well, yeah, I'll make a quick comment, and I think it's a pretty simple one, which is the second company that I was involved in sort of incubating, where the technology came out of the lab, we actually located initially in Berkeley. And it was compelling for two reasons. I mean, first of all, the only reason we ended up in Berkeley was because I ended up somehow stumbling on this guy Steve Golden's property, which was one of the only affordable lab spaces that we could find. And I don't want to, divulge confidence, right? But basically, within a radius where the employees and the founders of the company lived in Berkeley, wanted to work near where they live. Who doesn't, right? Within the radius where that was reasonable, where you wouldn't have to hop in a car and sit through 20 minutes of traffic.
Ride a bicycle, for example.
West Berkeley was, probably 4 times less expensive than anything else we could find, which was equipped to do the type of kind of industrial technology, with apologies on the branding, work that we were trying to do. And so I think, I think it's compelling for folks to stay here. And when I heard this question about what defines success, I think for the initiative I'm running, I see it very much as alignment, right? We want this to be a partnership. We want the folks who are supporting these people and technologies to be successful in the impact they make from the government. We want the people who are actually the entrepreneurial people, right? Success isn't how much money you make. It's what did you want to get out of this experience, and did you get it out? And for some people that's money, for other people that's impact. So, you want the lab to feel like there is benefit to the lab to investing in this initiative. And ultimately, I think you want the community to feel like there's benefit. And so the question becomes, what does the community want? And I think, I've come to know Berkeley a little bit. I mean, I think there are conflicting interests in a place like Berkeley, but it seems to me that one thing that everyone could be aligned on is, wouldn't you like for the type of people who live in Berkeley, in my company, we could have moved to Hayward, we could have moved to Fremont, we could have moved farther south. People probably would have stayed living in Berkeley because this is where they want to live. Wouldn't you rather them work somewhere where they can ride their bike to work and be doing something that's meaningful? I mean, I think that's compelling.
Okay. Jill, we should have you explain some of your activities, and I understand you're actually housed within the UC Berkeley campus.
Yes.
And it sounds like you have a brand new startup. So maybe you could talk about that and what makes that a good place of incubation for your business activity.
Sure. So is this on?
We'll go ahead and use that other, or here, let me give you this one for now, okay?
You can always rely on the cord. All right. So just to start out with introduction, my name's Jill Foose, and Cinder Bio is a company, and we make extreme enzymes for industry. And so what that means is that we're trying to green industry by using the power of enzymes to reduce chemical usage and also save water. And so this research, I've been in Berkeley for a long time. I was a grad student at Cal, and then I went up to the lab for my postdoc, and now I'm a research scientist there. But our company came out of, I think it was morphed. As we learned earlier. It came out of basic science research. We didn't set out to start up a company, but it actually started with a summer student project that after 10 years morphed into a viable commercial technology. And so when we had that decision point of saying, yeah, we want to start a company, it was 2 scientists, so myself and my co-founder. We sat at a picnic table. We thought, yeah, I think we've really got something here, and so then we decided to launch Cinder Bio. And so we've taken advantage of all of the resources in the East Bay and the larger Bay Area to launch our company. So as you said, we're a Startup in a Box graduate, so that's a program through QB3, and what that does is it gives you all the tools for your startup so they get incorporated and take care of that legal stuff and kind of walk through the process of starting a company. And so that's extremely useful to a couple of scientists that don't get out of the lab very much to be able to go through that. And then we've also done a couple of business plan competitions. So we did the Berkeley B Plan, which is now launched. competition, and that hooked us up with MBA students so we could refine our business model. We also did a Stanford business plan competition, and we also did a DOE business plan competition called Flow, which is a West Coast business plan competition. And so we actually, we did well in these programs. We were able to get a little bit of money, some cash prizes out of those, and those have sustained the company for quite a while now. And then through QB3, we were able to start up a small lab space. So we have a bench and a desk in the Stanley building at the top of campus. So that's the QB3 garage. And that's been ideal because, it's fairly inexpensive lab space that we can start, basically get on our feet as an independent company and be able to do a few experiments in that space. Let's see, what else? What other things? Oh, and then another thing that we've done is the Clean Tech to Market course, which started out at the lab, but now has been, is run out of the Haas School of Business. And what this did is we applied, we submitted our technology to this class, and then we got a team of 5 students to work on the technology or to work on market analysis of our technology. So ours is a platform for making these enzymes, and they went and they looked at all of the applications for our platform and figured out what would be the best entry market. And I have to say that completely changed our view of our technology and has really set the direction for our company. So it's been tremendously valuable to take advantage of some of those resources in Berkeley.
Well, it sounds like for your line of business, you don't need a lot of space to deal with enzymes then. They're quite small.
Right. It's, they're just molecules.
Right.
You'd think that, but you actually need, big tanks.
Okay.
We move a lot of liquid around.
Okay, very good. So speaking in terms of larger scale, I guess, Steve, you have a furniture manufacturing business, as I understand. Is that right?
Yes, and that's one piece of why I'm here. So we have a manufacturing business. We actually have as a result, a very high-end roboticized production facility. We do high-end machining. We've done for the lab parts at times. And when we're doing stuff with lower tolerances, we make furniture.
Okay.
But we also
it holds together well, that
yes.
furniture. Okay.
We call it the latest in earthquake technology. You can hide under it and be safe.
Okay, excellent.
But we also have industrial properties. We've done a fair bit of industrial rehab, and we have anywhere, which is really, I think, what I have most to speak to, because we have anywhere from 30 to 35 tenants at any given time. Ilan was actually one of the first tenants I dealt with in this property that we acquired in 2005. It is one of the only more affordable lab spaces. It's about 50,000 feet, and we bought it with only one tenant. It was only 20% occupied, and we had to work really hard to get tenants in. And in the course of the years, I go to every showing, which is a little bit uncharacteristic. It was a measure of my fear, but also because I care deeply about the kind of people that we get in. And so I've met a lot of young companies coming out of the lab, and the value system that they represent is it's a remarkable opportunity for us to capture. And so we've worked very hard over the years to try to renovate that space and to grow it, but we also became very involved with the discussion in West Berkeley over what manufacturing should be, how West Berkeley, indeed, one of the issues that came up that was very controversial that needs to be revisited from the ground up was how do we scale manufacturing there, and what should we look to retain, and how do we build structures and all the other questions which the CAG addresses. But I think West Berkeley is a remarkable opportunity. There is a lot in place with the passage of a new definition for R&D. So it is a very important thing for us to build around. So my main question is, what should manufacturing be? What is it now in the way that Berkeley looks at economics and manufacturing?
Right. I'm glad you touched on that. I wanted to come back to this theme because this is a big issue for Berkeley, and we had the West Berkeley Measure T, I think it was. So we're always trying to find what is the best way to develop this space. And obviously you are doing it with a lot of existing properties right now. I think the city would like to find the right development prototype or development framework. I don't know, Dean, if you had additional comments and just to get the rest of the CAG members in on this conversation.
Yeah, actually I do, but I don't want to take up all the time either. The difficulty that I see in doing what you guys are trying to do is trying to figure out how the infrastructure of our city can accommodate it. We're becoming denser and denser and denser, and with it becomes all the infrastructure problems that are not being addressed by our city. And therefore, I sort of charge you with taking some responsibility to making sure that you do your part to keep the infrastructure usable, and you do your part to make sure the politicians in this town understand that you want to be here, but you also need to be able to get your employees in and out. I don't know how many people you have on your employees who are living in Berkeley versus not living in Berkeley. What do you do with those employees that are driving into Berkeley every day, driving through our neighborhoods every day? These are the kind of issues that our politicians want to shove away behind the door. They don't want to talk about it. If someone doesn't bring it up and start talking about it, your business won't have any way of getting into town because the streets are going to be totally jammed. And West Berkeley is a prime example. If we went ahead and did some of the stuff you wanted to do down there without widening the streets, without improving the infrastructure, you wouldn't get your employees in and out. And so if you don't take that into account in what you're doing and get the city to start moving towards those kind of solutions, it isn't going to work. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting for having a panel comment on it, and as well, Alex. I would just say, as a business in West Berkeley, our bicycle racks are full of 20 bikes every single day, so people actually locate near our office so they can live near the office and ride their bike because it's a nice, healthy, and low-cost alternative. So for that, you don't need to widen the streets. They're actually too wide for bicycles if you look at it that way. But anyhow, Ann.
Well, I think all that you're doing is great, but I come from the nonprofit world, and actually a nonprofit in West Berkeley that might have to leave because our space we can't afford. But I do think that you're doing very exciting things, and you are going to change the world. But when you drive or ride the bus from the lab down to West Berkeley, look at the houses that you pass. And that really is Berkeley. That's, 80% of our population lives in very small houses in the flats and doesn't have a very high income. One of the nonprofits that I work with is, it's actually a nonprofit construction company, and we do energy retrofits for houses. And funded by the city of Berkeley in part. But the demand for our services is through the roof because it's free energy retrofits. But it's the type of thing that I think and we calculate the greenhouse gases that we save for every little house that we put insulation in or change a burner or put in a new door or put in new windows. So we are contributing, but I would love to see some mix between how you save the world on a bigger scale and how you actually impact on a very, very small scale. Because one of the things that I love about the lab and the tour that we had, not the last one, but one of the times, we saw the Darfur stove. And I was like, oh, that is just amazing. That is going to change more lives than anything in the molecular foundry. That really is going to change more lives. And if there could be an intersection between the exciting things that you are doing and your neighbors in the flats that are struggling to survive in poorly insulated houses, struggling to pay their $25 a month PG&E bill, and don't put solar panels on a house that's not energy retrofitted because you'll put way too much solar panels on there. We run into that all the time. So I'd just like to see a mix and just to keep aware of the mix of where you are, as you go from the hills down to West Berkeley. Thank you very much, and thank
So
you for what you do.
I can respond.
This is Jay James, right?
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
I hope you're out tomorrow at the council meeting with the BESO ordinance, this energy efficiency ordinance that's going through. So it's something from the Energy Commission, and I don't know what's the discussion there. I don't want to open up a whole thing, but this is just the side note in terms of, one thing, being able to start a business in Berkeley because of all of the infrastructure that's here, and because of the technology that we patented at UC Berkeley. I've stayed here. I don't really ever want to leave Berkeley. I'm from Berkeley. My fiance is from Berkeley. We're townies, and we live on Shattuck. And so, from my perspective, I love the changes that I see in downtown. More density downtown has been great for me. I live there, and I see, that makes me want to stay here even more. I commute by bike. So all these things seem really relevant. I work in one of Stephen's, units. That's where we started our first move out of the lab. Actually, I'm connected to so many people here, which is part of the great part about staying in Berkeley is that there's a whole Jill. Actually, hadn't even met her, and somebody I knew was one of those business students that worked with her. And so before I entered in the launch competition, the Berkeley competition, which we ended up winning the Clean Tech Prize for, she gave me advice. And then later I met her in the DOE competition where she completely destroyed us and beat us. And I, along with one of my judges in one of these competitions, I'm going to the Sky Deck on Wednesday to present in the finals there for that. So my perspective is that there's a huge amount of support for people wanting to start their companies in Berkeley. We also are able to bring in a lot of outside funds. We have 2 SBIR grants, which are federal grants that allow us to have our staff in Berkeley. And I guess in terms of creating jobs, we've got 4 new jobs in Berkeley. We plan on doing our manufacturing in Berkeley eventually once we get to that point. We have a low volume, high margin business of making chemical sensors. So for environmental purposes, which if you want to feel good about it as well, I wish I was working on something as impactful as the energy problem, but we're measuring environmental contaminants. That's what I wanted to speak to, is sort of say that I found it to be really welcoming place, and that there's tons of resources available because of work from all these people here and the network. So, until all the spaces are full at Stephen's building, I don't know, maybe, we'll definitely need to, make it so that it's easy for people to remain here and keep growing the network, because it's been great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jennifer, you have a comment?
Thinking about the multiplier effect of manufacturing and high tech is an interesting topic. Studies have shown, it used to be that manufacturing was considered the economic engine because it had a high multiplier effect of, and people can correct me if I get this wrong, but I think it's around 1.4%. So for every manufacturing job, you get 0.4 more jobs. I'm looking at the planner to correct me. What's interesting is that high tech has an incredibly high multiplier. And so when you get a nexus of high tech and manufacturing, I haven't seen a study that looks at that specifically, but when you look at high tech, that multiplier is oftentimes around 3 plus as a multiplier, not 1.4, which is considered high, but 3 times. Emily's giving me a look. I'm checking my numbers. Okay. So in terms of having a positive impact on the Berkeley economy, those multipliers are jobs at a coffee shop, for childcare, for accountancies, for all of the support services that go along with the business. And I think in a community like Berkeley, where we've just raised our minimum wage, that multiplier effect is going to be even greater. So I do see this. There are real social equity reasons to focus not only on this because of climate change and all of those kinds of things, but because of the job engine that lives behind all of the people you see here or the faces that we see. We just did a count of the jobs inside of the companies that have launched. We have about 200 startups that we're tracking outside of UC. We did a job count this fall, and it was 140 jobs out of 200 companies. And we're planning to do this twice a year to keep track. So you get to see these faces, but behind them are their employees, and behind those are all of the service professionals that keep all of us going every day. I see Naresh nodding his head.
Yeah, so there's one point that we haven't talked about, which is, I mean, you look at all of these pretty people with PhDs, that's kind of a misnomer. That's not the right picture. Because in much of manufacturing, you don't need PhD. They don't want us people there because we'll turn the wrong knobs anyway. What you will see is a huge role for community college students. So I want to give you two examples. When I did Sunshot, we realized that if you want to really put solar, you want the installers to be as good as James Bond. So we created a program which would train, at that time, a small number because we didn't have all the money, but which would train installers to be what they call master roofers, master installers, so that the city didn't have to come and do an inspection. It's those kind of jobs. And let me give you the second example, which kind of stunned me. When I was at Oak Ridge, turns out that there's a whole bunch of people who come back from Afghanistan. There's one fellow who had lost both his legs to an IED. And so the question was, we had a colleague in DOD who said, look, what can you guys do to help these guys? And we said, hey, bring them over. We'll teach them 3D printing, additive manufacturing, which is a rage right now. And so we had the first cohort of 20 people. All of them now have jobs very different from what they went out to Afghanistan for. They're all very independently marketable. And so you can see that having this ecosystem, whether it's a manufacturing demo facility or startup companies, you will have a bunch of people who are not the super duper Nobel Prize winner, but who will lead a normal life, will make $70,000, $80,000 salaries, but they're very, very valuable citizens. But in the process, what you have done is reinvent manufacturing in this country, which I think it's almost like discovering a new quantum effect or a new particle. Because it invests in yourself, and we have forgotten how to do that.
I'd like to get Nathan Hillison involved in this because you've had a lot of experience specifically with encouraging startups and growing startups, and here we're setting a high bar in Berkeley. We don't want just jobs. We want jobs across the entire economic spectrum. Like Ann was saying, we want to benefit the local community as well as the global society and economy in which we're a part. So maybe you can tie some of these themes together. Alex had a comment, and Jim as well, and Emily too. So this is a very obviously a lively discussion. Take it away.
So I guess I would say in Michael's parlance, Teselagen would be a morphed company. So it's coming out of technology from my lab at Berkeley Lab at the Joint Bioenergy Institute. We're also a blast out. So basically my other two co-founders I met at Stanford, and they had already gone through starting and selling companies, so we didn't really need all that much assistance from some of the programs. We also escaped through the low exit barrier. So we're currently located in South of Market in San Francisco. I'd be happy to tell you about the story of how we got there. I was joking last week with Sam, and Sam was telling me that probably the best predictor of where a company is located is where the CEO lives. And for us, that's Portola Valley down by Palo Alto. So that's something to consider too, is maybe like where the executives are living. I'd like to maybe talk about three specific things that Berkeley could do to kind of maybe be a little bit more attractive to some startups. So joked earlier that maybe one way to affect the exit barrier is to actually put up some big walls. Well, there's two ways of making a barrier. You could either build walls, or you could basically dig a deep hole and make it extremely attractive to stay here. And maybe in terms of trying to be more attractive rather than putting up some barriers, maybe three things. So if you look at a startup company in particular, it's very important to attract the right talent and get really good people. And at Berkeley, the campus and the lab maintain lists of graduate students and postdocs that are looking for positions. It turns out, and this is to the best of my knowledge, it might be inaccurate, but my understanding is that the university actually charges companies to get access to these databases. Now, if they actually wanted to promote startups and getting the best people, especially local talent, you might want to make all of these databases freely accessible to startup companies. Another thing that's really extremely important for startup companies is kind of getting PR messages out. So whenever you're a startup company and you just get a new investor or you have a new product, you basically put out a PR release. And one thing that could actually be really great with the community is to actually think about having joint kind of PR stories coming out of the community and with the company. So the company benefits because it gets more attention, and also the community is seen as being more friendly to having startups around. And maybe a third thing, this kind of touches maybe a little bit on what Jennifer was talking about. We've been approached as a small startup company by the Center for Biosustainability in Copenhagen. And they're putting together grant proposals from the European Union where they're going to be embedding their graduate students in companies for, say, 6 to 9 months. And they approached us, would you actually be willing to host our graduate students and get some real industrial training during their PhD? And I think maybe if somehow either Berkeley as a community or the lab or the campus, while they're putting together these grant proposals, if they could think about embedding some postdocs or graduate students in startup companies, even for 6 to 9 months, it'd be great for the student, for the community, for the university, and then especially for the startups. Maybe 3 specific things that could make it more attractive for startups to stay in Berkeley.
I'm also glad you brought up Copenhagen, probably arguably one of the most livable cities in the world, major bicycle infrastructure, and some of the smallest streets of major European capitals, too. Interesting. Alex, you had a comment or a question?
Question, rather, and I think this is a question probably either for Ramesh or Alon. I absolutely love the vision of creating the hard tech ecosystem center of the universe in Berkeley. As a graduate student, that's something that really resonates with me. How well does that interface with the lab's current capabilities? If not, are there things that the lab will have to do going forward to expand their capabilities? That could be people, that could be facilities, infrastructure, all of those things.
So I'll start and I'll let Ramesh finish. I think he's probably got the real answer to that. I would say I'm gonna back up for a second because I haven't met Ann, but your comment really sort of shook me. Not in a good way, right? It was fantastic in a bad way, but shook me in a good way. Because this is Brett. I care a lot about what you were saying, but I also kind of had a different reaction, which is, a transformation here may happen anyway, and I guess that's important to me. My wife and I just moved back from DC. We love the idea of living in Berkeley or Oakland, nearby Berkeley. We basically got priced out because of what's happening, and I'm sure you're all aware, which is we just created hundreds of millionaires in San Francisco doing things like building companies like Twitter. And those folks are coming to live here, and my perspective is this: if you play that story out and you say, how is that going to transform? I'm not saying there's anything bad about these people, right? But if you play this out and say, how is that going to transform this place? And how do you keep this place from looking just like another Soma, right? Or just like another Palo Alto? I actually think there's an opportunity to sort of control that destiny. And and for me, and I'm biased here because what we like is to build real things in manufacturing, and we think it's important, right? But being proactive instead of not doing anything, it may be the only way, in my view, to kind of figure out where that goes. And so, to that point, I think this opportunity around, I like hard tech because it sounds cool, but I also feel like maybe it's better to go with something like industrial tech that doesn't sound, shiny, and it just is. I think in terms of the capabilities of the lab, Alex, the 2 main capabilities that I think are needed are, most of this stuff relates to science, and we do a ton of science, and it's not just the lab, it's also the campus, right? This is one ecosystem. And 2, it's about the talent and the expertise to understand that science. That's, I think, someone else here mentioned this question of, where should the innovation start and where does it go and how does this impact the rest of the ecosystem? The lab's strength is in science and in that first step from the science towards the technology. To actually build something that scales and impacts the world, you need manufacturing. You need a different set of expertise. That's why this guy's here. So I'll let Ramesh talk to it. I'm going to have to excuse myself because, I actually have a family close by, and I got to run and catch them before it's too late. But I really appreciate the time with the group here and definitely welcome any emails or calls to follow up.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ilan and Ramesh. And I don't know, Steve, did you want to comment on this as well? And then we still have Jim and Emily and Paul as well. So a lot of comments. If you could be
So in
succinct
short,
here, we'll
Alex,
get
the answer is
everybody in.
yes, both in people, resources, systems level work. Manufacturing is a big deal. Doing stuff at much larger scales, going away from TRL1, if you know what TRL is, technology readiness level. Science is one. We want to be at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So absolutely. So you will see a lot of new people.
Okay, Steve?
In trying to name, I would just, as we're talking about what it may be, this group is the advisory group for the community. And I think as a Berkeley with its history is quite varied. And I think that this is one of the very important nodes that, the industrial tech, the green tech behind and the research behind the lab is phenomenally important. But I think it should be modeled in a way that also the community in which it grows, the social innovation, which we have a remarkable history of in Berkeley, is some people are very fearful of. But I think it's a remarkable opportunity to think, again, how as a city we can embrace this and think of ways and represent it not only within our own community but to others, to lead in a way. We have an internal marketing problem, an internal communications problem. We don't know as much, this is responding to what's happening on the Hill and what our opportunities are. With all the small companies we have, there are so many lines of communication to connect where we'll find opportunities for the community to benefit from. If there's, in energy efficiency, if there's something the lab maybe will study the city, and the city will remarkably allow some of this monitoring to be done in a way that actually helps us individually be efficient, but also helps on the systems level and on the national, international level. So I think they're remarkable opportunities.
Okay, Jim is next up.
Thank you. Well, first, tonight I've noticed that anytime an issue came up around some tension between development and preservation, people sort of looked at me as the city of Berkeley. And I could tell you that gets a lot more complicated than that, So, but my question's a little bit different. It involves the youth of the city of Berkeley. And I noticed you've mentioned, grad students and undergrads at Cal. And I also noticed that a number of you mentioned that you have children yourself. So as members of the community, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are about how do you structure things with innovation and entrepreneurship in such a way that it benefits the Berkeley youth community as a whole?
Let me give you.
I was doing very well here, and last year I went to Oak Ridge, and it was the middle of winter, 9th of February. 9 o'clock, one of the associate lab directors said, let's go back to the lab. I said, dude, what are you doing? It's 9 o'clock, it's cold. It was 9 degrees outside. He said, no, let's go. We went there, and I did not believe what I saw. 100 high school kids were there in the lab, in Oak Ridge's manufacturing capability, doing 3D printing. They were basically playing. But then you get the picture, right? If you do this in consort with the Berkeley high school system, you're now taking a generation of kids who are unprogrammed, so they're not touched by the biases that we have, and you let them be creative. And these kids were building robots and stuff like that, and they're always hitting all the big championships, the Intel and the Westinghouses. So I think the lab and the university has a huge amount to offer, not for the PhD students, which is pretty much organized crime, right? We do that. We do boom, boom, boom. But I think it's a generation which is still very young. And you can start to reach out to them through these things where they just start to play with this stuff. And so we launched something called the MakerBots, where you simply have a room like this, a lot of 3D printing systems, and say, come and play with it. And they will start to create new stuff.
Any, why don't we go to Jill then on the same topic of serving or engaging youth?
Yeah, so one of the great things of coming out of the lab is that we have a really world-class student education program. And so I've worked there for 13 years, and I've had students all those years at every level. I've had a couple of Berkeley High students, I've had community college students, I've had UC Berkeley students, I've had college students from different parts of the country. And you know, I've also visited schools from elementary schools, junior highs, high schools. I'm going to a high school in a couple of weeks. And so it's really, it's in my blood now to involve students and youth, and I'm really passionate about involving women in the STEM fields. And so I know that as I grow my company, I'm going to be bringing in women in science and students, and work, you know, I'm trained, I know how to work with students, and so that's definitely how I'm going to grow my company. You know, if I'm going to build a company from the ground up, I'm going to do it in an inclusive and diverse way.
Okay, a view from UC Berkeley and the campus.
This is a question that I have as an architect and design professional who's been working or participating in a number of roundtables about benefits corporations, B Corps. And one of the things that we're talking about related to them is how the evaluation of these things could affect the physical environment of our cities. And I think it's sort of interesting to me in terms of the discussion about what's in West Berkeley and about how the impact of businesses on the environment, you know, what that means if we're really thinking about reinventing manufacturing, which I think is, you know, is a very powerful statement. But I'm interested in if any of you are, in fact, B Corps, any of the businesses that you're talking about. And if you are, have you thought about ways in which you can use environmental design and the character of the environment as one of the things that that you use to assess your companies?
Anybody on the panel care to pick up on that idea?
I only just learned about B Corps with the Plum Foods, is it the baby food company?
The baby food company.
Right. So that educated me, and it kind of changed how I was thinking about corporations.
So you want to know what it is in short? It's very interesting. You know, when you incorporate, you are basically, you know, your fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders is to make a profit. With B Corps, which are now have been created by state legislatures in a handful of states, including California, you can identify areas that you want to be evaluated on separate from the complete profit-making part. So you could say, my company is also going to be evaluated based on, you know, do we have a diverse workforce? And therefore, you know, your shareholders will be evaluating you on that as well as on whether or not you make maximum profit. Anyway, it's a complicated thing. I'm not an expert on it. But it provides a way to have a goal that involves the wider community. And it's interesting in terms of the discussion of how manufacturing is.
Well, I think it's interesting you bring that up because we earlier talked about how we evaluate effectiveness, what are the measures of performance, and basically you're widening that spectrum of measures. So it's perfect for Berkeley to consider because we have set this higher bar. It isn't just job creation or wealth creation, but it has to do with inclusion and across the wide spectrum of jobs and to serve people at different income and socioeconomic status. So, yeah, go ahead, back to Jill and then Jennifer.
I just wanted to make one comment about that, in that, you know, when we were starting the company, the advice we got, you know, it's really VC focused. And so, you know, right, exactly. And so when you're trying to figure out how to incorporate your company, all the advice you're getting is for when you take VC funding, and that may or may not be the best path for your company. So it's a really good point that these other models need to be incorporated into how startups are started.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I want to go back to the point, also just about Berkeley youth. So I have a number of good friends who teach at Purdue in West Lafayette. And one of the concerns is that their kids, when they grow up and get educated, will leave West Lafayette because there isn't the kind of opportunity that we have here. So they train this talent and they leave.
We're talking about Indiana, right?
Yeah. not that Lafayette. So the situation here is very different because we are developing this infrastructure, and we have 7 PhDs, but we have 22 people that don't have PhDs. So we actually bring in a lot of these kids into the company. And my personal experience, I had 2 kids who were born in Berkeley, my son actually graduated from Berkeley in computer science. My daughter went to Amsterdam to study design. They both have come, he left for a long, long trip, but they both came back, and they're starting a company in Berkeley after being exposed to many other things because they are excited about this town. And they went through the Berkeley Public Schools. And so I think we have a lot to offer for youth in this city, but we have to, you have to show them the way.
Good, excellent question. Phil was next in the queue, Paul, Carol, but also, did you want to comment on this one, Jennifer?
Well, I was thinking about my drive over here. I had to drive back and forth to bring my daughter her math book. And because she had gotten tutoring at the Berkeley High Career Center where Cal students go and volunteer after school to help kids who are falling behind. When I told my son what I was doing, I said, oh, it's a Berkeley lab. And he goes, oh, have you ever been to the Berkeley lab, he asked me. Why, yes, I have. I said, well, I have too. And all through his Emerson school system, he benefited from Cal students who also, who were volunteering their time in the Berkeley school system. So I personally, as a parent, benefit from the university's presence in our educational system practically every day. I think there are more opportunities. Berkeley High, my daughter's in an econ class and they have to put together a business plan. I think it would be so fun to have Haas students or even some undergraduate Haas students evaluate their business plans. I think it would be a wonderful opportunity both ways. There's always more that we can do. And in terms of the B Corp, it's a really interesting and deep question and one that we've struggled with in Berkeley for a long time because I think Berkeley is all about the nexus, or I feel like the generation that I'm part of is all about the nexus of using business to make the world a better place. I think a previous generation thought that business was the problem. My generation looked around and saw, well, business is controlling everything. Let's use those tools to change the world. And I think what Emily has pointed to is yet another structure that legally protects investors. For some of these businesses, I actually really hope that you do whatever you can do to get the most money possible to have the biggest impact. So I wouldn't want to see you in any way limit your financial opportunities because we had to have a Berkeley, and this is going to sound terrible, a Berkeley do-good thing. What I really want is for Cinder Bio, for Visco, Steve Visco and your company to be successful in the main realm of your activity, which happens to have a positive economic impact. I think B Corps are awesome for things like that don't necessarily have a visible green component right from the outset.
Okay, very good. Phil
That
Price.
might be why there's none here.
Okay.
They're good for restaurants and that kind of thing.
Okay. Phil is next up.
I have so many thoughts about so many dimensions of this that you guys would not tolerate me saying even a third of them. But one thing I commend to your attention, a hilarious Onion article from years ago, Nation's gentrified neighborhoods threatened by aristocratization. And this is about a recent influx of exceedingly affluent powder-wigged aristocrats pushing into the nation's gentrified urban areas and pushing out young white professionals, some of whom have lived in these neighborhoods for as many as 7 years. Anyway, it's this article actually is from 2008, so this is not like it's this year we've somehow discovered gentrification or whatever. It's all this stuff is really complicated because we want conflicting things. We want everybody to have jobs, but we don't want a bunch of rich people moving here, and we don't want the incomes to go up so much that poor people can't afford it. But these things simply sometimes are in conflict. And I think the key point, to get to Anne's point, is the best we can do probably is to have as many jobs as possible. Every time high-paying jobs are created, as Ramesh pointed out, you also create low-paying jobs. and Jennifer pointed out too, and to have as many of those come from the local community too. So you don't end up with sort of, oh, all the rich people live over there and all the poor people live over there and the poor people travel to their work and the rich people don't. You know, to the extent it can all be local, that's fantastic. And to the extent that it's all in Berkeley, that's kind of fantastic. But what's wrong with the people in Richmond and the people in Emory? Like, you know, I want them to have jobs too. And to some extent, I was feeling, I felt this conflict just a few months ago. I bought some custom shirts. Some guy from Thailand who comes a few times a year, gets a hotel room in, rents a hotel room in Oakland. People come in, you get measured, he goes back, you know, a few months later you get shirts. I've never previously in my entire adult life owned shirts that fit. I don't have to, I'm a scientist and I wear this all the time. But it was hilarious when the guy measured me. He said, oh, you have banker's arms, because my arms are so long I can get all the money on the table. My arms are longer than my span is longer than my height. Anyway, so I finally got shirts that fit, but they were incredibly cheap, so cheap that I feel guilty about it. The people cannot possibly be getting like a good wage making me shirts, custom-made shirts, really nice shirts with really nice fabric at $30 a piece. I mean, it's ridiculous. But what's the answer? Do I say, oh well, I'll give some American, you know, $200 to make this shirt for me? How does that help the guy making $30 and, you know, who isn't even making $30 now? So I think this stuff is all complicated to the extent that a job in Berkeley is not a job in Oakland. Maybe that's not a good thing for the kinds of people Ann is worrying about. But to the extent that a job in Berkeley is not a job in Silicon Valley where like they don't really need the money, or a job in Berkeley is better than the company isn't here at all because the synergy didn't come together, I think that job is fantastic. So it's all very complicated, and I just want to point out there's not a solution that maximizes everything.
But so Phil, you know this, right? You're from the lab. I mean it seriously. You're a tech guy, right? The scale for energy is so much different than semiconductors. Semiconductors are $250 billion worldwide market. If you believe all the numbers, the total energy consumption is about 15 terawatts. Dollar a watt, it's $15 trillion, okay? So the scale of operation is very different in energy. So I say that if we do it, not if, when we do it, right, then forget about Berkeley versus Richmond. I think the entire country will benefit, and we will create a different need. That's why, I mean, they did it. Henry Ford did the automated manufacturing. He brought all of that from Germany, and I think we can do that in other areas. We have to reinvent it.
Well, I certainly agree with the rising tide, rising all boats, but I'm also wondering, in the context of this discussion about jobs in Berkeley and what can we do to have more jobs in Berkeley, I want to point out it's not the worst thing in the world if a job ends up in Oakland instead, or Richmond.
May I say, I guess have to say something about this as economic
We're trying to
development.
get it on the video, so.
So we are a small city it'd be one thing, I don't know where East Lafayette is, but I presume that it's a small community with a lot of cornfields around it, something like that, okay. So we are not that. We are surrounded by other communities. And so we can't think of ourselves as an island. We think of ourselves as part of a larger community. And in the same way, there's sort of a portfolio of spaces that are available to businesses as they spin out of the university. Those that need the tightest connections with the university, and actually, quite frankly, can pay the premiums that Berkeley elicits because of its relatively low crime rate, its incredible foods, its awesome bike paths, the terrific schools, all of the other things that we get from being here in Berkeley. People pay a premium, then they can stay here. If they need acres of manufacturing space, then I can't in good conscience, I want them to be successful. I can't in good conscience send them to West Berkeley. If they need acres of manufacturing space, I hand them off to my colleagues in San Leandro, in Richmond, in Oakland. Jim is making a terrible face. First we look in Berkeley if we can't find it. Okay. Truth is, we look, and then we go, okay, we don't have what you need. Okay, that's the first step, but it's a very fast step. And we consider it, quite frankly, we consider it a win when one of those companies lands in the East Bay and not in the West Bay. as we like to call it, because this innovation ecosystem does not live only in Berkeley. It actually spans from Richmond all the way down to San Leandro, and some people include Hayward. And those communities are getting more and more sophisticated. They're managing their own ecosystems in a really powerful way, and that actually really benefits all of us here in Berkeley, because the more the East Bay is seen as a real player in this space. As soon as Elon put up his map that showed San Francisco and Silicon Valley, instantly was like, where's the East Bay? And it was really wonderful to see that laid out, and I have data to help that we've been gathering to help make that argument. So anyway, that's just a topic that we think a lot about in our department.
Okay, Paul has been waiting to get a comment in here.
Basically a reality check. You've heard of Berkeley? Because the place is crazy. And this may be Polly and Jennifer and Jim's fault, but the reputation of Berkeley is very different from what I'm hearing today. It's an awful place to get things done. Any homeowner you speak to in Berkeley will tell you the nightmares of getting things approved. So is it just bad advertisement, or is there another part you're not telling us about?
Well, maybe panel members can address this, because that does have a reputation of not always being business friendly. I think that's what Paul is clearly addressing. Steve?
So I've been in looking for tenants and understanding the market, I've been all over the area to startup meetings, both biotech and info. And with Polly and Jennifer and others, and Michael Cohen, we're a group of people, particularly with the city, have been thinking about how Berkeley should be going forward and figuring out as what's happening here, what should the market presence be. So Polly started an innovation award with the concept of leading with the questions about what it should become. Steve was one of the recipients in the first year, and it's been a process to try to understand and present these concepts to the city and get feedback, and I think it's evolving. And we're starting to get people are just calling. I'm getting emails out of the blue saying, "Oh, here Berkeley's a different kind of place." So yes, historically it has been that, but I think that things are really starting to improve. With this kind of a meeting with the university, I think turning more towards the city, and with the reputation we're getting, I think it is a real opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Polly wants to join in on this.
Well, I want to follow up on what Stephen said. I've had this job running the Chamber of Commerce for 4 years now, but I don't know if you know that in my dark and haunted past, I was on the Berkeley City Council. So I've sat on all sides. Berkeley is such a different place now than it was. I go to work way more than I should, and I work constantly with the lab, the university, the city. We're all in it together. I know it sounds like kumbaya, and we should all have our cigarette lighters or our iPhone flashlights or whatever it is, but it really is different. Now, it takes a while for the word to get out, and it is still true that if you want a liquor license, you might as well just hunker down, because it's going to take you a lifetime. But there is a real circle of us who are all working together to change the reality and what people believe about Berkeley. So it's going to take patience. We'll be a little grayer and a little more weary, but the difference is absolutely touchable. And those of us who've lived here for a long time are cynical, and rightly so. But if you look at all the people, these awesome people that are here because they're excited by Berkeley. I've spent 4 years trying to convince people that we're the Berkeley Chamber of Commerce, not the National Chamber of Commerce. It's a learning curve, man. It's like being a preacher in a Jewish community. You got to really work.
The nuclear-free zone sign still up.
All gone. All gone. Now they say.
I drove to my lab every morning to work with isotopes, and they had to pass. Berkeley is a nuclear-free zone.
Did it make you feel better?
We have more nuclear than any other place.
They now say we're a solar city.
Okay, Carol, you've been waiting to come back. Okay. Here we go. Let's keep it going.
I too have been with a nonprofit that had to leave West Berkeley, and I signed the ballot measure against Measure T because I wasn't thrilled at what was supposed to be happening in West Berkeley. What I want to mention, though, that I think has not really come up, Berkeley is the first city in the United States that has opened up a buried urban stream. That may not sound like a lot, but an urban stream that is vegetated will clean more pollutants, organic and inorganic, out of the system than any treatment plant. And we've only done it to one. And there's a lot of more work to do. There are a lot of streams that are under people's houses, which isn't very smart to live over a culverted creek. But I do want to remind people again that Berkeley, much of Berkeley depended on the New Deal, Roosevelt's New Deal. If you would go to the Berkeley Historical Society, you'll see that all the major landmarks were built by uneducated, to the greatest extent, people, and they did a fantastic job. And all I'm Luddites, of course, so, you know, if it doesn't include water and trees, I'm not so interested. But the thing is...
Don't you dog drive a Prius?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm not driving.
Didn't you?
No, never. Anyway, the problem I see in Berkeley is that there's a lot of interest in tech work, of course. But one of the businesses that I most admired was one in Mill Valley that is developing trees, seedlings, to send to Kenya, because they are going to become a desert again if they don't get more trees, because the people have to use the trees for firewood. When we open creeks, which we've done in other places in the Bay Area, we use Conservation Corps kids. Most of them are not educated very much, but they have a wonderful time opening the creeks. And the more you can do to restore the environment, and in particular, to plant more trees to stop global warming, the better off we'll be. So I hope within the tech world that you live in, you can remember that too.
Okay. The full range here. Jay, did you have a comment, or Ramesh?
I'm worried that we're the victim of Berkeley's most popular business, the parking ticket. You know, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other panel comments, CAG member comments? We are going to try to wrap up. It's been a long evening, but also members of the audience that are here attending, the community at large, any comments here before we wrap up tonight's meeting while we still have everybody assembled? Were there any people wishing to speak or address the group? Okay, Chris?
I want to broaden this discussion a little bit beyond just Berkeley, although I realize I am a community representative. My dad had a high school education, and he worked in a factory in Southern California, and I got my education because I got a scholarship. But I don't think my dad would have a job anymore because those kinds of jobs don't exist. And when we talk about the Silicon Valley, what I think we forget, or we are talking about tonight, is that the manufacturing jobs in the Silicon Valley are all in China. The people who have jobs in the Silicon Valley are well-educated programmers. They're not people who are building anything. So it was refreshing to hear Ramesh and Steve Vesco talk a little bit about building things. As the lab is a federally funded institution, I hope that when they consider about transferring technology, they think about transferring it so that it creates those jobs for middle-class people that are sorely lacking in the United States. I think there was a comment about the multiplier effect that's going to give a lot of jobs for baristas and so forth. Well, that's not the kind of job I'm talking about. So I just would like to emphasize that the kind of jobs that need to be created, I think, for the welfare of the whole country, not just Berkeley, are not the kind of jobs that are a spin-off to service sector. They're manufacturing jobs.
Excellent point, a good theme to end on. And before we do wrap it up, let's thank our panel members and speakers here this evening. There's obviously a lot more we can talk about. I think we definitely hit a major topic area of great interest and great opportunity for the city of Berkeley and beyond. So thank you all very much for this meeting tonight, and have a great holiday season. We're going to wrap it up for this year, 2014, and we will see you in January 2015 for a new CAG reset and a new plan for 2015.